First Blood isn't about a man who snaps. It's about a country that can't admit that it's lost. America lost Vietnam. Not just tactically, but psychologically.
He'd much rather be a businessman than a soldier, but right now he's in charge of the lives of 21 men.
It was the first time that the heavyweight got into the ring and got beaten clean. The smaller fighter went the distance and won on points. That matters because America's entire self-image is built on a cowboy myth. Good guys win, strength prevails, and history always bends the right way.
You wanted law and order in this town. You've got it.
However, Vietnam broke that spell, and by the early 80s, the job wasn't to understand the loss, it was to try and forget it, to rebuild the ego and get back in the ring. Reagan told the country,
believe in ourselves and to believe in our capacity to perform great deeds.
And then Rambo walked into town. When First Blood reaches cinemas in 1982, the United States isn't at peace with Vietnam. It's simply tired of talking about it. There's no shared version of the story that people are comfortable repeating. There's no ending that works cleanly or, crucially, heroically, and it left behind consequences that don't sit easily inside a peacetime narrative.
And then we came back and we were different, and everybody wants to know, God, what happened to those guys over there? Gee, I saw them marching around a parade ground. They all looked so nice and clean cut, and they all had smiles. And then you come back and you're not smiling anymore. We did what we had to do. And people wanted us to be ashamed of what it made us.
That tension is already there in the novel. David Morrell has talked about the moment that sparked First Blood when he was watching American TV news in 1968 and seeing footage of soldiers fighting in Vietnam cut directly against images of National Guardsmen patrolling burning US cities.
And the impetus then was to write a novel that would try to dramatize the conflicts that were going on in American society, the intent being that it was essentially an anti-establishment book and very much against the war.
So he asked, what if? What if the war didn't end? What if it just relocated? But the film itself doesn't announce any of this. Rambo walks into town, gets picked up by the police sheriff.
Now jump in. I'll make sure you're heading the right direction, huh?
Why are you pushing me? What did you say? We don't want guys like you in this town. Drifters.
And then dropped off on the outskirts. The moment where he decides that this is the last place that he's going to be moved on from. He gets arrested and processed and treated in a way that slides quietly from procedure into humiliation.
How you like that, huh? What's the matter, Mitch? Don't you like water sports?
The film lingers here longer than you might expect, on the mundane details and the small indignities that are easy to justify on their own. Nothing looks outrageous in isolation, and that's kind of the point. Violence doesn't enter the story as a premeditated plan. Rambo is post-Vietnam syndrome before PTSD was recognised. Rambo gets pushed, and he pushes back against a force that he knows he'll lose against, eventually. But for a short while, he gets to do what he was created for. In his mind, he gets to show what he's capable of. To live again. Formally, First Blood is more confident than it's often given credit for. It's not slick in the way that the sequels become, but it's really assured. Rambo isn't framed as being an all-powerful being. Not in this one, anyway. He's framed as hunted and cornered and a reactive individual, almost feral. His competence doesn't look like heroism. It looks like professionalism that's been damaged and rebooted. It doesn't reassure you, and it doesn't pretend this is fun. That matters because this is the last time the series behaves as if it trusts the audience.
Stand right where you are! Give yourself up!
First Blood plays as a warning rather than a fantasy.
I'm warning you, boy, don't make a move, I'll blow your head off.
And that restraint is exactly what the sequels eventually abandon. Jerry Goldsmith's score is crucial, but not because it pumps anything up, although it does do that at times. It often sounds mournful, regretful, and occasionally even exhausted. Even the main theme feels less like a rallying cry and more like a funereal march that you can't quite escape. By the time First Blood finally gets made, it's already been through nearly a decade of rewrites and false starts. The film rights are bought in the early 70s, while Vietnam is still ongoing, which is part of the problem. Early drafts lean hard into allegory and bleak finality. In some versions, Rambo is killed by an unknown shooter. In others, both Rambo and Teasle die, but none of those versions ever get made. At various points, the role of Rambo is linked to Robert De Niro, Clint Eastwood, Paul Newman, Al Pacino and Robert Redford. The tone keeps shifting, exactly because the country is still coming to terms with the war. What finally unlocks the project isn't clarity, it's timing. By the early 80s, and with Reagan's new optimism in the air, enough distance has passed from Vietnam for the material to be commercially survivable. And Sylvester Stallone's post-Rocky star power gives the project something it never had before, a centre of gravity. Stallone rewrote the script repeatedly, not to soften it completely, but to rebalance it. His version of Rambo wasn't anti-American. He was patriotic. He believed in the system. He just didn't trust the people who were administering it.
You know, wearing that flag on that jacket, looking the way you do, you're asking for trouble around here, friend.
That distinction matters because it allows the film to sit with mainstream audiences without rejecting the country outright. The biggest change is structural. Rambo survives. The suicide ending is shot, then rejected after test screenings. Stallone and Ted Kotcheff settle on an ending where Rambo is emotionally broken but alive, contained rather than erased. That choice isn't philosophical, it's pragmatic. It gives them options, financial options, options that they'll eventually take. Taken on its own, First Blood can look like a tragic character study. Seen in context, it feels more like a moment of exposure, a brief point where America's shame for Vietnam is allowed to exist on screen in human form. What comes after isn't a misunderstanding, it's a rewrite.
Bastard.
Under Reagan, the national ego is reinflated. The later films don't change Rambo, they change what he's allowed to mean. By Rambo First Blood Part 2, Vietnam stops being wrong and becomes simply unfinished. Rambo goes back to cauterize the wound, to correct the record and turn defeat into moral victory. He doesn't just survive the war, he wins it. And gets to score the touchdown America never got to celebrate. By the third film, Afghanistan is reframed as a place full of misunderstood people and a conflict that is, conveniently, just as decent. Well, for at least a while. By Rambo, the fantasy has stopped trying to fix history at all. It settles for something easier. Violence aimed at an enemy so monstrous that guilt no longer applies. And by Rambo Last Blood, even that pretext collapses. What's left isn't patriotism or myth, but grievance, paranoia, and a rage turned inward. The later films don't redeem Rambo, they exhaust him. They chart what happens when a national ego never processes defeat and eventually runs out of enemies big enough to justify itself. Question is, who would Rambo fight in 2025? Full disclosure, I absolutely love First Blood. For years it was one of my go-to hangover films. I know every single line of dialogue. I even love the way the siren on the police car dies when the car turns over. Rereading the book recently, I was impressed by how even-handed David Morrell is. He alternates the point of view in each chapter so that we get a balanced perspective. As such, you can't diagnose either character as the hero or villain. Rambo's a Vietnam vet who won the Congressional Medal of Honor, and Teasle fought in the less renowned Korean War yet received the Distinguished Service Cross. It's an accolade for bravery which is second only to Rambo's Medal of Honor. And it's that feeling of second rate that gives Teasle his ultimate motivation for refusing to back down against somebody who is ultimately his white whale, his Moby Dick. It would have been a better film had that been explained.
This is my town, and I'm not giving it up to you or to Rambo or to anybody else.
Ultimately, Morell's original story tries to percolate the Vietnam War and American attitudes about it into this battle between the two veterans, showing that escalating force results in nothing but disaster. Nobody wins. The film is much more binary, of course, and it's understandable. It was never trying to be Coming Home or The Deer Hunter, but I think Brian Dennehy, who was a great actor, does a great job of conveying something of a balance to an otherwise fairly unsympathetic character.
Seems like bailing you out of trouble's getting to be a lifetime job for me.
There wouldn't be no trouble except for that king shit cup. All I wanted was something to eat.
The novel ends with defeat. That's the point. The two men show what happens when single-minded violence is allowed to escalate unchecked. Nobody survives, but the film hesitates, it chokes, and it lets Rambo live. Not because that makes it truer, but because at the time America wasn't ready to sit with what he represented.
But the man kept pushing, sir.
Well, you did some pushing of your own, John.
First Blood isn't the beginning of the Rambo myth. It's the last moment before America rewrites the ending.
They drew first blood.
Rambo? Are you still reading me?